Welcome to Miss Detective. On Thanksgiving Eve, November 24th, 1971, a man approached the counter of Northwest Orient Airlines in Portland, Oregon. He bought a one-way ticket with cash on a flight bound for Seattle, Washington, under the name Dan Cooper. Airport security was at a minimum level at that time. Passengers didn't go through metal detectors, there were no bag checks, and no ID checks were required for domestic flights in the U.S., so Dan Cooper boarded his flight without any hindrances. With 36 passengers on board and a crew of 6, the flight left Portland on schedule. Cooper took seat in the last row and ordered himself a drink. He was described as a white man in his mid-40s, with dark hair and brown eyes, calm, polite, and well-spoken. He was wearing a black or brown suit, white shirt, black tie, a black raincoat, and brown shoes. He was carrying a briefcase and a brown paper bag. Cooper's seat was in front of the flight attendants in the jump seat. Shortly after takeoff, he handed a note to the flight attendant right behind him. She assumed this was just another flirtation with the note offering a date and dropped it into her handbag unopened. Cooper then leaned toward her and whispered, "You better look at that note. I have a bomb." She sat down next to him as he requested and asked quietly if she could see it. He opened his briefcase and showed her 2 rows of 4 red cylinders attached to wires and a large cylindrical battery. She gazed at the object. It looked alarmingly like a bomb. Cooper told her his demands, which she wrote down and brought to the cockpit. He demanded $200,000 in ransom, equivalent to approximately $1.5 million today, and 4 parachutes, upon landing in Seattle. Additionally, he ordered the plane to be refueled and all passengers to remain seated until he had the money in his possession. He would then release the passengers, and the last items brought aboard should be the 4 parachutes, and at that time, only the crew members were to be on the plane. The captain told the flight attendant to remain in the cockpit for the remainder of the flight and take notes of events. He then communicated the hijacker's demands to Seattle-Tacoma Airport Air Traffic Control, who contacted local police. The president of the airline authorized payment of the ransom and ordered all employees to cooperate with the hijacker. The passengers were informed that their arrival in Seattle would be delayed due to some small mechanical difficulty. The plane circled for 2 hours to give the police time to collect the ransom money and the parachutes. The money, unmarked $20 bills from the Seattle First National Bank, was photographed on microfilm by the FBI. The Seattle police collected 2 parachutes from a local skydiving school and the other 2 from a local stunt pilot. During the flight from Portland to Seattle, Cooper demanded that one of the flight attendants stay by his side at all times. After landing, the captain parked the plane on a partially lit runway. Cooper also insisted that the cabin lights be turned off, preventing the snipers around the airport from seeing inside. He demanded that only one employee of the airline approach the plane with the ransom money and parachutes through the aircraft's front door, and that one of the flight attendants should retrieve the bag. She exited the aircraft to retrieve the ransom money, and upon her return, she carried the money bag past the seated passengers to Cooper in the last row. When she brought the last parachute to Cooper, she gave him a note with instructions on how to use the parachutes, but Cooper said he did not need them. A problem with the refueling process caused a delay. Cooper became impatient and demanded an explanation. Apparently, he knew the Boeing 727 could take in 4,000 gallons of fuel a minute. The fuel crew brought 2 more trucks to complete the job, and Cooper released the passengers and 2 flight attendants unharmed. Cooper then gave the crew his flight plan to fly toward Mexico City at the minimum airspeed possible at a maximum 10,000-foot altitude, with the landing gear remaining deployed, the wing flaps lowered 15 degrees, and the cabin remaining unpressurized. The pilots informed Cooper a second refueling would be necessary before entering Mexico. Cooper agreed on Reno Tahoe International Airport as the refueling stop. The plane took off with Cooper and 4 crew members aboard, 2 pilots, a flight engineer, and a flight attendant. 2 F-106 fighters from McCord Air Force Base and a Lockheed T-33 trainer followed the 727, they stayed behind so Cooper would not be aware of them. After takeoff, Cooper told the flight attendant to lower the aft staircase. She told him and the crew she was afraid of being sucked out of the aircraft. The flight crew suggested she come to the cockpit and retrieve a rope and tie herself to a seat, but Cooper rejected that. She kept expressing her fear to him, and finally he said he would lower the stairs himself. He then instructed her to go to the cockpit and not to return. Before she left, she begged Cooper to take the bomb with him, to which Cooper responded he would either disarm it or take it with him. She then walked to the cockpit and turned to close the curtain partition. Cooper was standing in the aisle, tying what appeared to be the money bag around his waist. She noted that Cooper remained calm and composed throughout the ordeal, even as he prepared for his escape. His demeanor was almost businesslike, which added to the surreal nature of the situation. Cooper opened the aircraft's door. A warning light flashed in the cockpit, indicating the aft staircase had been deployed and the pressure on board had dropped. The pilot used the cabin intercom to ask if Cooper needed any assistance, but Cooper's final response was just a no. With the aft cabin door open and the staircase deployed, the crew stayed in the cockpit, not knowing if Cooper was still aboard. They used the intercom to inform him they were approaching Reno, and he needed to raise the stairs so they could land safely, but there was no reply. The plane then landed without incident at Reno Tahoe International Airport, with the aft staircase still deployed. The plane was quickly surrounded by police and FBI agents who thoroughly searched it, but the hijacker had vanished, taking with him 2 parachutes, the money, and the suitcase containing the bomb. FBI agents found a tie and a tie clip and 66 latent fingerprints aboard the plane, as well as 2 of the 4 parachutes. The agents interviewed eyewitnesses in Portland, Seattle, and Reno, created a series of composite sketches, and began questioning possible suspects. Defining the search area where Cooper could have landed was difficult. The environmental conditions along the flight path varied with the aircraft's location and altitude, as well as the plane's airspeed, and no one knew how long Cooper remained in freefall before pulling his ripcord. The Air Force pilots did not see him jump from the airliner, nor did the radar detect a deployed parachute. It was a moonless night with limited visibility and cloud cover. The FBI recreated the flight with the same aircraft and in the same flight configuration, and by pushing a 200-pound sled out of the open air stair. Initial estimates placed Cooper's landing zone in an area on the southernmost reach of Mount St. Helens. Law enforcement searched large areas of the largely forested terrain on foot and by helicopters. Lakes were searched on boats, and even local farmhouses were subject to searches. But neither Cooper nor any of his equipment was ever found. A month after the hijacking, the FBI distributed lists of the ransom serial numbers to financial institutions, casinos, racetracks, and other businesses that routinely handled large cash transactions, as well as to law enforcement agencies worldwide. In addition, Northwest Orient offered a reward of 15% of the recovered money, but these attempts were not successful. However, in 1980, a small portion of the money was discovered. This finding rekindled public interest in the mystery, but provided no new information about Cooper's identity or fate. FBI agents found 4 pieces of evidence on the plane, each with a direct physical link to Cooper: a black clip-on tie, a hair from Cooper's headrest, a mother-of-pearl tie clip, and 8 cigarette butts from the armrest ashtray. The hair from the headrest was suitable for future comparison and was preserved. However, during their attempts to build Cooper's DNA profile in the year 2002, the FBI discovered that the hair sample had been lost. The cigarette butts were sent to the FBI crime laboratory to search for fingerprints, but no usable fingerprints were found, so the butts were sent to the Las Vegas field office. In 1998, the FBI attempted to extract DNA from the cigarette butts, only to find that they had been destroyed while in the custody of the Las Vegas field office. In 1980, a family on vacation by the Columbia River uncovered 3 packets of the ransom money. The bills had deteriorated from prolonged exposure to the elements, but they remained bundled in rubber bands. The FBI confirmed the money was a portion of the ransom, as the serial numbers were a match. A hydrologist observed that the bills had most likely not been deliberately buried. The finding of the money supported the hypothesis that Cooper had landed near the Washougal River. Early statements from investigators and scientific consultants were based on the assumption that the bundled bills had drifted freely into the Columbia River from one of its many side streams. But the free-floating hypothesis failed to account for 10 missing bills from one packet and how the 3 packets managed to stay together after separating from the rest of the money. The physical evidence conflicted with the geological evidence. The free-floating bundles would have washed up on the bank within a couple of years of the crime. Otherwise, the rubber bands would have deteriorated long before. So the discovery ultimately raised more questions than it answered. In late 2020, an analysis of diatoms on the bills suggested that the bundles discovered by the Columbia River were neither submerged in the river nor buried dry at the time of the hijacking. The presence of diatoms that bloom only in spring indicates that the money entered the water at least several months after the incident. The flight attendants, as well as 2 passengers, described Cooper as around 5 feet 10 inches tall, thin build, with short black hair, slightly dark or olive skin tone, brown eyes, and spoke with no discernible accent. He seemed to be familiar with the Seattle area and may have been an Air Force veteran. This suspicion arises from testimony that he recognized the city of Tacoma from the air and accurately mentioned that McChord Air Force Base was about a 20-minute drive from Seattle-Tacoma Airport, a detail unlikely to be known by most civilians. In 1973, the FBI released a suspect profile, suggesting that Cooper was likely a military-trained parachutist, drawn from his apparent familiarity and comfort with the military-style parachutes he was provided. Cooper's conduct prompted the FBI to conclude that he exhibited a superior intellect compared to the average criminal, as demonstrated by his sophisticated language and precise application of aviation terminology. Profilers deduced from Cooper's swift and adept adjustment to diverse scenarios that he was probably the type of individual who would perpetrate a crime solo, without requiring or desiring an accomplice. Given the evidence and Cooper's methods, the FBI speculated that he methodically prepared the crime and possessed detailed, specific knowledge of aviation, the surrounding geography, and the capabilities of the 727. To avoid being given damaged gear, he demanded 4 parachutes, creating the impression that he might force 1 or more hostages to jump with him. But the most significant knowledge Cooper demonstrated was about a unique and secret feature of the aft air stair. It could be operated during a flight, and the activation switch in the rear of the cabin could not be overridden from the cockpit. Some have speculated that Cooper was a military parachutist, and others that he was an Air Force aircraft cargo loader, where he would have received basic jump training, worn emergency parachutes, and learned how to dispatch items from planes in flight. The FBI investigated the case for 45 years, but failed to arrive at definitive conclusions. The incident remains the sole unsolved case of air piracy in commercial aviation history. The FBI speculates that Cooper did not survive his parachute jump due to adverse weather conditions that night, his unsuitable clothing and lack of proper skydiving equipment, and the fact that the ransom money was never used. And one more important fact: in their rush to collect the ransom, the police grabbed a training parachute which Cooper took as a spare. That parachute was sewn shut and couldn't open. These models have special markings that a professional parachutist would definitely recognize. Subsequent analysis revealed that the initial estimate of the landing zone was also incorrect. Additional data from a variety of sources indicated that the actual drop zone was south-southeast of the initial estimate. The police originally thought Cooper was an experienced jumper, but no experienced parachutist would have jumped in the pitch-black night, in the rain, with a 172 miles per hour wind and wearing loafers and a trench coat. Jumping at night drastically increases the risk of injury, and without jump boots, Cooper would probably have suffered severe ankle or leg injuries upon landing. He did not request a helmet, did not have equipment for survival in the wilderness, and did not seem to have an accomplice on the ground to help him escape. However, FBI agents were not unanimous in their assessments of Cooper's fate, and no conclusive evidence of his death has been found. In the months following Cooper's hijacking, 5 men attempted similar hijackings and all survived their parachute escapes. That led the FBI to reconsider their theories about Cooper's chances of survival. Between 1971 and 2016, the FBI processed more than 1,000 possible suspects, the most notable ones being Richard Floyd McCoy, a former Green Beret and Vietnam veteran who was arrested for a similar hijacking just months after Cooper's. He bore a strong resemblance to Cooper and had the necessary skills, but he was later ruled out because he was in Las Vegas the day after Cooper's hijacking. Dwayne Weber. On his deathbed, Weber allegedly confessed to being D.B. Cooper. His widow reported that he had a criminal past and had mentioned details about the hijacking that were not public knowledge. However, his fingerprints did not match any of those processed in the plane, and his DNA did not match the samples recovered from Cooper's tie. Kenneth Christensen. A former paratrooper and Northwest Orient employee, Christensen matched the physical description of Cooper and had a suspiciously large amount of money after the hijacking. There was no concrete evidence linking him to the crime. Lynn Doyle Cooper. A woman claimed that her uncle, Lynn Doyle Cooper, had planned something suspicious around the time of the hijacking and returned home injured, but there was no definitive evidence to confirm his involvement. In 2007, the FBI had built a partial DNA profile from samples found on the tie, but the evidence did not conclusively link Cooper to the source of the DNA samples. In 2010, following new research, particles of titanium were discovered on the tie, leading to the theory that Cooper might have been an engineer or manager at a chemical or metalworking plant. Additionally, investigators have discovered microscopic metal fragments on Cooper's tie, which have been traced to a Pennsylvania steel company that worked with Boeing. This has led to a theory that Cooper might have been an employee at this company. In July 2016, the FBI officially closed the investigation. The investigators have never found a parachute, a suitcase with a bomb, or any other traces of Cooper. But enthusiasts and amateur detectives have continued to pursue theories about Cooper's identity and fate. However, a recent DNA breakthrough could finally uncover Cooper's identity. Scientists are using advanced DNA analysis to isolate individual DNA strands found on the tie, potentially identifying Cooper by the end of 2024. It will be fascinating to see if modern technology can at last unravel this decades-old mystery. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.